Good evening. Welcome once again to the Bible Speaks Today from LBC TV Ministries here in freezing cold Latonia, but at least we're not in Boston. We're recording this on the 27th of January, and whilst we suffered a little bit of ice and dusting and snow, think about the poor people up in Boston with 2 or 3 feet of snow. I was talking to a former pastor of this church who lives up on Block Island, which is off the coast of Rhode Island, for those of you who don't know. And he has 2 or 3 feet of snow, 30 mile an hour winds, gusting higher, no power, no water. He said that if it wasn't for the propane stove to make the espresso one, and I don't know how he does that, life would be totally miserable. But then he likes it up there, so I guess that's good. Most of us, if it goes below about 25, we're looking for somewhere warmer. I know I would be. Usually this time of the year, my wife and I are in Phoenix, Arizona, with family. And these programs you see during that period of time are pre-recorded the previous December, November, December. This year we decided not to go, and I'm not sure that was a wise decision. But at least we're here and we're recording, so that's good. We're still in, and likely to be for some months, in Dividers of the Bible, who wrote the Bible. Please don't think, oh no, it's going to be the same, because it is quite interesting, believe me. And it does give us, when we go into this, it does give us such an insight into the formation of the Bible and why things are the way they are. And really, if you're going to hold a book up as the basis of your, not the basis of your faith, it shouldn't be. I mean, our faith is in our Saviour crucified and resurrected for our sins. But if you're using the Bible, and that is my workbook, my guidebook, my information book, my instruction book, if you like, then knowing all about it would seem to me a worthwhile thing to do. I think so, which is why I'm doing the programs. If you don't think so, you can drop me a line and tell me why. Or if you'd like to see some more of this sort of thing, then you do the same thing. We're in chapter 7, would you believe? A lot more to go. And we were just talking about how the difference between the E, you remember the E, coming out of the northern tribes, Israel, and the J coming out of Judah, the southern tribes, how the same stories were told but with different details, okay? And it's sometimes difficult to remember, so I want to remind you again. E, where they use the word Elohim for God, E is predominantly written or describing the northern kingdom. That's the 10 tribes who disappeared after the Assyrian conquest. J is Judah, easy to remember. Now, as we said at the very beginning of these programs, there was an extra bit called P that was in J, which is the priestly side, but for the purposes of just, keeping this moving, I haven't bothered to put those in any detail. We will address that later on. But I want to go back from where we were last week, where we were talking about how the city of Shechem, important to both sides in the Judah, in the J document. I told you the story about the daughter who'd been badly treated, and so they went in and killed all the people there. And yet in the E document, the same story is where they paid for the land and lived on it. I mean, that's both those stories are in the Bible. I'm not telling you anything that's not there. They're just different viewpoints, okay? But I want you to tonight go back a moment to the stories of Jacob's sons, and Jacob, the tribal patriarch, Jacob's sons and his grandsons, and of course they all became the 12 tribes. In the E document, those are mentioned in the E document, okay, are Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulon, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. And you'll notice in the E document, they are all the tribes of the northern kingdom, Israel. So we're writing about something that happened way back in the past, but it identifies the tribes as the tribes of Israel. If you read the J document, you end up with Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Now, just to make things easy, or not easy, but just to clarify things, Reuben and Simeon lost their territory, and those two tribes merged with Judah, which was why Judah was as big as it was. And I want to reiterate, and I will continue to do this through the program, is we are not talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of people here. People get the impression that these are huge tribes. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a very small country, relatively sparsely populated. And what we call tribes were nothing much more than extended families intermarried, in-laws and cousins and that sort of thing. I don't have figures on how big the tribes were. I do know that Levi was quite big because they were the priests. But all of them were not several thousand strong. There wasn't that many people populating it. Something to consider when we do this, all right? So, those tribes merged with Judah, and they are the southern kingdom. Now, J, the southern source, if you will, justifies the birth order. Now, birth order is extremely important, as it is today in some cases, right? If you're the number one son, you're going to inherit. If you're the number two son, well, you get whatever number one son didn't get. I mean, and back then it was this. The patriarch, when he thought he was dying or something, would say, okay, I'm going to give half my land to this number one son and a quarter of my land to this son and the other quarter to that son. That's how it was done. So birthright was extremely important. So from the J order, if Reuben was the first, and that's the way they show it, Reuben should have got the biggest amount of land. But there's a nice little story here. Reuben started to play around with one of his father's concubines. Oh yeah, the old patriarchs had concubines, and that dropped him out of his father's favour. Okay, now all of this political stuff has an effect on how this goes together. So okay, Reuben's out of the running. He's not the favoured son, so Simeon will be next, and then Levi. But what did Simeon and Levi do? Well, they were involved in the massacre at Shechem, right? We just talked about it last week. So they're out of favour. Okay, so Judah, bright, sparring, youngest of the group, Judah gets the birthright. Okay? Now, if you go to E, that's the northern kingdom references, you don't hear anything about Judah or Simeon, Levi. Okay? And Jacob's deathbed, Joseph, remember Joseph? I know it's hard to keep track of all these guys, but Joseph gets a double portion. Okay? And Ephraim and Manasseh get a portion each. But it's equal to the portion of Reuben and Simeon in this case. And there's a nice little story here that Joseph positions his sons in such a way as the right hand is the predominant hand. We consider it today. When you swear an oath, you put your right hand up. When you shake hands, you shake with your right hand, unless you're one of those funny cults that do it with the left hand. But anyway, and as it was then, the right hand, the blessing, went on with the right hand. And Joseph, I'm getting confused now, Joseph arranged the boys in such a way as Reuben, that they would, not Reuben, that Ephraim and Manasseh would get the top blessings. So Manasseh and Ephraim. And Jacob crossed his arms. It's in this nice little story in the Bible. Crossed his arms to get Ephraim gets the preeminence. So you read that, and it's one of those, let's be honest, one of those boring parts of the Bible where you read it because it's in the daily Bible study, but you have no clue what it's all about. Well, what is it about Ephraim? Why should Ephraim get greater? And Joseph protests. Joseph says, hey, Dad, that's Ephraim, not Manasseh. It should be the other way around. And Jacob tells him that Ephraim will be greater. Okay? What the writer of the source E, does is develop a hierarchy which favours a grandson, not a son. Okay? And why was that, do you think? Well, think about this. Ephraim the tribe of Ephraim, was King Jeroboam's tribe, the king of the northern kingdom that Abiathar the prophet had selected to be the king. And the northern kingdom is the E source. Somebody's writing about the northern kingdom, so he's writing about his lot. Okay, Ephraim was King Jeroboam's tribe. So, oh yeah, King Jeroboam's tribe has preeminence. All right, the capital was at Shechem. Okay, but Ephraim was also another name, and you'll see it in the Bible quite a bit. Another name for the kingdom of Israel. So that the writer or the source in E is already inferring that Ephraim is going to be blessed from way back in Jacob's time, because look what's happened now. Ephraim is the son of Ephraim is the king in the northern kingdom. So you can see here that the J stories fit the cities and the territory of Judah. Okay, makes perfectly good sense, and the E stories fit the cities and the territory of Israel. There's all sorts of little things going on here that if you look at it carefully, you can pick it out. I told you the other week of a book I had which had like a listing of all the verses in the Bible right the way through from Genesis to Deuteronomy, and it had them in like, you know, E, J, P, whatever, D, where it came from. And I thought you could get it, but it's out of print. You can't get it now. I found a small paperback book from years ago which has the same sort of thing, and what I'm going to try and do is see if I can scan that and print it up, and if anyone wants one, don't do anything yet. If anyone wants one, I'll see if we can get them printed up and maybe get it out to you. But what it does is simply shows you the book of the Bible, and it shows you which verses came from J and which verses came from E, if there were any, and which verses came from P. So you can see how all the different verses fit together. It's a fascinating thing. Anyway, in E, Northern Kingdom, and I'll keep reminding you of this because I know I lose track sometimes. In E, there's a story where Joseph asks, when his deathbed, asks for his bones to be taken home. Now, you may be familiar with the way they did burials in those days. They buried them, and then after a time when the flesh had all gone away, they dug them up again, or wherever they put them, and they put all the bones in a jar, you know, an ossuary. Still did that in Jesus' time. So he's asking for his bones to be taken home. Okay, now in E, and only in E, are they taken home. Now, why do you think that's important? Well, it so turns out that the traditional site of Joseph's tomb, back then, and today of course, was in Shechem, Israel, in the northern kingdom. Little story to enhance the importance of the traditions of the northern kingdom. Okay, in the J source, in the Judah source, okay, the Egyptians are called taskmasters. You remember when they're talking about making the bricks and not enough straw, and they go to the taskmasters, and the taskmasters say, hey, you got to deal with what you got, you got to do it. All right? In the E source, the same story is told, but this time, and I mentioned this in one of the earlier programs, they are called the officers of the Missim. What was the Missim? The Missim was the thing Solomon put on the tribes, where you had to give a month a year in forced labour to help build all the projects and things like that. And the northern tribes hated this with a passion. So, when the northern writer writes the story for his version of it, he calls the taskmasters, or the Egyptians, the officers that miss him, because that's the worst possible insult he can think of. Again, trying to make the point. In E, Northern Kingdom, Joshua becomes a leader. Okay? In J, he has no role at all. Now, you say, oh yes, he is, he's in the Bible. I'm talking about two different sources. So if you read, if you could have one of those books I was telling you where the stuff's in different prints so you know which is which version. If you read the first 5 books of the Bible about Joshua, all the references to Joshua are in the E, Northern Kingdom source. The J source doesn't even mention him. So why treat him differently? Well, Joshua was a northern hero, identified as coming from the tribe of Ephraim, Jeroboam's tribe. You see where this is going? The writer in the north, the writer's writer in the north, is writing the biblical story as they see it in the north. And of course, our guys are the best. All these biblical heroes come from our tribes, not from that lot down south. There are very many modern comparisons to this, and I'm not going to go into it, but I'm sure you can think of some. Again, Joshua's tomb is in Ephraim. And he leads, if you read the Bible carefully, he leads that big covenant ceremony was at Shechem in the northern kingdom. So the northern kingdom's source, the writers or writer of the parts of the Bible that come from the northern kingdom's point of view are emphasizing how important the northern kingdom is in all of this. Okay? I mean, what about that? Remember Moses sends people out to spy out the promised land, remember? Now, I guarantee you, if you're going to see a lot about Moses, it's going to be from the J Southern Tribal source, okay? One of the groups that go out, there's a guy called Caleb. Remember Caleb? Of course you do. Yeah, right. Caleb is one of the people that goes out and spies on the land and comes back and says, you know, what it's like. Caleb travels to the Negev, that's the desert in the southern part of the country, and to Hebron, and as far as, it mentions it specifically, as far as the Wadi Eshkol. If you look at those, where that is, Negev, Wadi Eshkol, you will find that it's all Judah's territory. In other words, what Caleb looks at as the promised land is Judah's stuff. Now, they're writing this later than on, obviously, but trying to impress the fact that, of course, the promised land is Judah. Those people up the north, we don't know who they are. We don't have anything to do with them. Caleb, of course, was the ancestor of the Calebites, who lived in the hill country of Judah, which included Hebron, which was Judah's capital. So, from a lot of this, you know, looking at these things, we can ascertain a few things. First of all, we can say with a fair degree of certainty that the person who wrote E was probably a priest from Shiloh. Long tradition of priests in Shiloh writing it. He was possibly a descendant of Moses, but he's critical. And this is something that's, again, hard to deal with. In the E source, the writer talks about how wonderful the northern kingdom is and how, you know, all the special places are in the northern kingdom and all the heroes came from north and Moses was the greatest and he's from us, you know, that sort of thing. But they also make a point about this golden calf issue. Now, you know the golden calf story. Moses goes up on the Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai, whichever one you think of, and that depends on which side, J or E, you're writing from. And he comes down, and Aaron, his brother, the chief priest, has made a golden calf, and people are running around. Now, a couple of things to make clear here. The people weren't worshipping the golden calf. The golden calf was considered where the seat of the Lord, where the Lord came down and sat or was. It weren't worshipping the calf, but it was idolatry as far as Moses was concerned anyway. So, if you remember in that story, the Levites were a bit unhappy about this because it was idolatry, but Aaron was trying to please the people. So, the Levites were loyal. It's important to remember this. Aaron wasn't. Okay, but you can't, even if you're in the party that doesn't support the Aaronites, which was the Jerusalem priests, the southern kingdom. The Levites lived mostly in the northern kingdom, but they'd been badly treated by Jeroboam, you know, not put in positions of power because they didn't cross his palm with silver. So the Levites are pretty upset with Jeroboam. And they make it clear. But they also denigrate the Jerusalem priests. Because, hang on guys, you've got an ark down there that you say holds the Ten Commandments. But hang on a bit, Moses broke those when he came down from the mountain. Right? So what have you got there? You haven't got the Ten Commandments. Maybe what you've got isn't worth anything at all. So, again, all of these writings are kind of like pushing things. Well, they don't have the veil ark because there's no commandments there because Moses broke them because of what the Aaronic priests did, or Aaron did, and the priests who followed him after that. The E-writer, Northern Kingdom, their hopes, and as I say, they're priests from Shiloh in the Northern Kingdom. Their hope was in the Northern Kingdom. They had nothing going for them in the Southern Kingdom at all. Okay, at this time anyway, and so they supported, if you will, the political move of the split of the two countries, but were displeased by Jeroboam's actions in favour of, in his personal choices of leaders and priests and things like this. So the writer attacked what he saw religious offences. Again, let's go back and look at J. The ark was central to Judah's religion. Okay, the temple of the tent of meeting, or the other word for that is the tabernacle, was central to Israel. Now, the tent of meeting was the original. If you've read your Bible carefully, there's a description of how they made this tent up, with all the goat skins and to make up the worship place and the place for the ark in the desert. So Judah had the ark, but the Northern Kingdom. Based their big thing was the tabernacle, which was originally associated with Shiloh. In the Northern Kingdom writings, the ark isn't even mentioned. Something you would think as important as the ark would be in both accounts. It's not. So both sides are writing their account of their history as they see it, with a particular leaning towards showing that the other people aren't right. I've said in these programs many times that the Bible is the inspired word of God. I have no problem with that. What I say is that as men wrote it down, and men have their own particular viewpoints and political and religious leanings. And so, whilst God inspires them to write, what they write is not necessarily, maybe that's what God intended, I don't know. But each of these two sources, the J and the E, wrote the story from their point of view. If you like, it was if somebody had written about the civil war in this country. The writer from the north wrote what happened at different battles, and the writer from the south wrote what happened at different battles, and there probably is something like that around, or you can get it. And their viewpoints of the battles, the north was an astounding victory, and the south said, hey, we won, we were betrayed by lack of supplies or something like that. I can remember back in my college days reading an account about the end of World War I, and there was an extract in this history book of how the German people were seeing the First World War. And I think one of the sentences I remember, and I don't think I'm quoting it exactly, but it went something like this: and the German army, whilst victorious on every front, was betrayed by the politicians at home and lost the war. In other words, their slant on it. Now, nobody on the Allied side would give you tuppence for that, would they? Because it wasn't true, but it was how they saw it. Okay? So, let's go back to Genesis for a minute. There were cherubs. God put cherubs at the entrance to Eden. Remember that? To guard the entrance to the Garden of Eden. So Judah justifies their cherubs on the ark from that. The Exodus. Who was responsible for the Exodus? God or Moses? Interesting point, isn't it? I mean, here you go. If you read in J, Judas document, it says, I, God, am coming down to save you. It says that, no two ways. In the northern kingdom, who were pro-Moses, very pro-Moses, the same passage reads, the same passage, for the same thing, side by side in this split up Bible I have, says, I am sending you, Moses, to save them. J and E have many, many similarities. Same stories, same characters, you know. So what was J? Was it a Judean court document, account of all the traditions and the history and this sort of thing? A book that was kept at the court, because obviously not everybody had copies of it. Okay? But if that's the case, then E had to have something similar, otherwise their court wasn't legitimate. And to make it more complicated, maybe it was the other way round. Maybe E started to put this court document together and J thought, oh, shoot, you know, we better have one of those, otherwise we're not going to look like we're legitimate. It's a very, very convoluted political and religious conundrum. But there were two sources, each allied north and south. And we're running out of time, so we'll pick up this up next week, okay? Until then, you might want to go back and see if you can pick out for yourselves where the tones or whether the verses change. See if you can pick out which is north and which is south. Until then, good night. God bless.